What's going on, everyone? Loschmeister here, and today we are going to be going over some benchmarks that I've run on my computer. I ran quite a few, also just some general game performance, just some stuff like that to kind of, go over what this thing can do so you can get an idea of what components you want in your system or so on and so forth, and also for those that are interested anyways. So first off, we're going to kind of go over the specs of my computer just one more time in case you didn't watch the first video. So for the main components, the CPU, it is the Ryzen 5 5800X, or is it the Ryzen 7? I don't know. Either way, 5800X. Then I have the RTX 3070 from Gigabyte. It's their Vision. I don't think that really matters too much. I have 32 gigs of 3600 RAM. I think it's 3600. Yeah, 3600 megahertz. It's the Corsair Vengeance Pro RGB. And I think that's pretty much that. That's all we really need to go over for the specs that I have in there anyways. So on to the first benchmark. So for the first benchmark, we have Time Spy from 3D Mark. So I ran it, I did the regular run, and I got a score of 13,294, so 13,294. It was done at 1440p, and the general graphics score was 13,727 with a CPU score of 11,282. During the GPU test, the average frame rate was 90.9 with a max frame rate of 12.3 and a low frame rate of 76.14. During the first GPU test, the average temperature for the GPU was 63.9 degrees, while the CPU maintained a steady 60.88 for pretty much the entire test. As for GPU test 2, the average frame rate was 77.63 frames per second. The maximum was 99.8 frames, and the lowest was 53.96 frames. And for the average temp for the graphics test 2 was, for the GPU, 64.5 degrees, and then for the CPU, it was 61.16. And again, just kind of, prefacing, all of this is in Celsius, degrees-wise. And then moving on to the next benchmark. For the next benchmark, it was still in Time Spy, but it was the CPU test. On the CPU test, it had a 37.91 frames per second average, with a max of 83.3 and a low of 36.39. During this test, the lowest temp for the CPU was 65, and the highest was 73, which I think was actually the highest out of all of the tests. It ended up getting to that. However, I did try to do the Time Spy stress test. However, my computer crashed in the middle of it. I don't know exactly what happened. I had left the room and let it do its thing, and I came back and it would shut down. So I'm just going to give that a fail. I couldn't really figure out what happened, but so that's it for Time Spy. We'll move on to the next benchmark. So the next benchmark we're going to be looking at was Firestrike Extreme version. So I went for the higher version of Firestrike because I figured the computer could handle it, and it did pretty good. For the overall score, it got 15,626. The graphics score was 16,168, while the physics score was 29,228, and the combined total score was 8,017. This is all according to the results page. Continuing with Firestrike Extreme, the GPU test, the first one, had a 81.8 frames per second average, with a high frame rate of 96.6 and a low of 67.5. The average temps for the first GPU test were 65.3 for the graphics card, and on the CPU, only 60.1, not bad. As for the graphics test, the second one, graphics test 2, the average frame rate was 61.63, kind of disappointing, not gonna lie. The low was 53.9, and the high was 89.45 frames per second. As for the temperatures for the GPU test 2, the GPU average was 62, and it was 61 for the average CPU temp. onto the physics test. So the physics test had an average frames per second of, it's not there. Okay, great. All right, so the physics test. The physics test had a average frame rate of around 94 frames per second, with a low of 84.7 and a high of 98.5, with average temps with the GPU at about 48 and the CPU about 68 degrees. All right, moving on to our final like software benchmark, I guess you could call it. We have Cinebench. So I used the newest version of Cinebench. I did both a multi and a single core test. For the multi-core test, we scored 14,612, which seemed about average. It was okay. The single, unfortunately, we only got about 1,551, which seemed a little weird to me because the computer should be able to turbo to about 4.5 gigahertz, and I've been seeing that quite, on average, that being true. But during the test, the single core that it was using just so happened to kind of just chill around 3.8 and 4. It seemed like it wasn't giving it its best attempt. I don't know. It was weird. But that's, that's what the score said. So there we go. But so that was the Cinebench scores. Onto the games. All right. So for the first game benchmark, we have Tomb Raider. This was done at 1440p. Max settings, everything, through the roof, maxed out. And we got a total frames of 20,274 and an average frames per second of 129. Unfortunately, we did not have any temperature readings. I kind of expected there to be that in the kind of like results page of the test, but there wasn't. It was weird. So I don't know. But other than that, that's Tomb Raider. And then for the other game, I play a lot of Overwatch, so I tested Overwatch, I guess. I play Overwatch at about 180 frames per second. Like, obviously, it'll go from 179 to 180, at least about there. And I play it for hours on hours, just while recording with OBS running at 1440p max settings, and I never get over 70 GPU, 70 CPU. Like, it's always sitting under 70. This computer is really impressive, honestly. It just kind of tears through stuff. I know Overwatch isn't the most intensive game, but I mean, max settings, 180 frames, like all that's something, right? But yeah, so that will conclude this kind of benchmark going over, stuff video. If you guys want to see any other benchmarks, feel free to let me know. I couldn't really think of anything else to run. These were all standardized ones that I've seen before, and free ones, obviously, because I just spent all this money on a computer. But yeah, if there's anything else you want to see, let me know. Feel free to drop it in the comments, no problem. And thank you all for tuning in, and I really appreciate you guys, all the support on the first PC video and all that. And yeah, hope you guys have a good day, and thank you all for tuning in. And yeah, take care. Peace.